Good afternoon, scholars. We're looking today at lesson 1-3.6, the Crusaders, or more appropriately, perhaps, the Crusades expanded. Today we're going to be taking a look not just at the First Crusade and the initial call for Crusades, but we're going to be looking at all of the different Crusades that occurred during this time. And by all, I mean some, and by look at, I mean quickly understand the basics of, because the Crusades is a huge topic that we just don't have that much time to dig into that level of depth on. So today is the Crusades, or the Crusaders, Whirlwind Edition. So to start off, Crusading Nations. There were many, many nations that took part in the Crusades, but really there are a few that stand out as the most important for us to know. Number one being France. In the East, here we're talking about Asia, we're talking about the Turks, referred to all the Crusaders as Franks. This was certainly not true. There were many groups that were not Franks, such as Anglo-Saxons and other Germanic peoples who were involved in the Crusades. But there were so many from France that it simply became shorthand to refer to all these Western Europeans as Franks. But there certainly were people coming from Britain, that is England up here, and from the Holy Roman Empire as well. Usually each of these Crusades would have some components from each of those nations. But France really did wind up contributing the bulk. Additionally, and importantly, when we're talking about navies, Genoa, and as we'll see, Venice as well, are going to contribute naval support during the Crusades. The impact of Venice, or the influence of Venice, in the Fourth Crusade will really actually prove fairly tragic to that crusade. We'll get to that in a little bit. Now, First Crusade review. We have already talked about the First Crusade in some greater depth, but I do want to quickly walk us through that because that sets the stage for our additional Crusades. It was called by Pope Urban II in his council at Clermont in response to a Byzantine request for aid against the Seljuk Turks. So the Crusades were right from the start called to support the Byzantine Empire. We do see Crusaders from France primarily, but also from southern Italy partaking in this particular Crusades. Those southern Italians were the Normans, and if you remember that, Normans are the Norsemen, and they kind of went through and wreaked havoc on Europe some number of lessons ago. Now, these Crusaders went through and established for themselves Crusader states. They did not return the land to the Byzantine Empire, and so we wind up with places like the Principality of Antioch, controlled by the Normans. We have the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and a few others worth mentioning, but I won't actually say them by name. The Second Crusade is going to be fought sometime later. We're looking at about 50 years after the First Crusade. And in this Second Crusade, Louis VII of France and King Conrad III of Germany, we call him a king of Germany, although we're going to be going back to talking about them as Holy Roman Emperors pretty soon. They go back and forth. They march to Jerusalem, and then they plan to expand this crusade out to the city of Damascus, another important city in the region, located right here, which at the time was controlled by the Seljuk Turks. This crusade will not go well. They do arrive in Jerusalem. They plan their attack. They march out. They attack Damascus. They fail. And so the French and the Germans simply pack back up and they return home. The Second Crusade was a failure to expand the Crusader states. The Third Crusade, fought a few decades later, was in response to the Islamic Empire kind of getting their act together, proving to be more of a threat, and so much so that they retake Jerusalem. This Islamic Empire had been fractious, had been about 100 years of fighting between the Seljuks and a few other groups, and we wind up having this man right here, Saladin, finally consolidating the power of the Islamic Empire, and in 1187 having the power to reassert Islamic authority, Islamic control over the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And they retake Jerusalem in 1187, which prompts the Pope to call a Holy Crusade to once again capture the Holy Lands. In this, we have three main armies, one from England, one from France, and one from the Holy Roman Empire that set out. Now, the Holy Roman Empire emperor is going to die along the way. The French king, this was one of the Louis, I can't remember, is going to kind of give up on this fight. He doesn't like the disunity of the crusade. He's going to return home, but he actually leaves most of his French troops in charge of Richard the Lionhearted of England. Richard the Lionhearted is a younger brother of the King of England, and he's going to lead this Crusader army really right up to the city of Jerusalem itself, but he's unable to capture it. But he does negotiate a truce with Saladin that allows for unarmed pilgrimages to Jerusalem. So the unarmed pilgrimages to the city have returned. That is a step in the right direction, but not enough. A Fourth Crusade is called in 1202, runs till 1204. Now, this is called specifically by Pope Innocent III to recapture Jerusalem, but they never even go to Jerusalem. The plan was for these crusading armies to meet in the city of Venice. Venice was going to transport them to the Holy Land. They were going to fight their little war. Venice was going to support them, and it was going to be a grand old time, except the Crusader armies didn't show up with enough cash to pay the Venetian navy for the transport. Well, the Venetians simply say, hey, we've got an idea. Constantinople is not really expecting an attack right now. They're pretty wealthy. Let's just go sack the capital of the Byzantine Empire, take their cash, and you can pay us with that. And so the Fourth Crusade essentially becomes this fight between Venice and Byzantium, having nothing to do whatsoever with its initial purpose, the recapture of Jerusalem. Now, this winds up being devastating for the Byzantine Empire, which is not prepared for this. The city of Constantinople is captured and recaptured twice, and is brutally sacked. A lot of the wealth is carted off and given to Venice. And in addition, Venice takes over a lot of the coastal lands that had been under Byzantine control. Venice really gets out of this quite wealthy. The Crusaders themselves get virtually nothing because everything that they acquire, they owe to the Venetians. And the Byzantine Empire is weakened. And it's just a mess. So much a mess that Innocent III, the guy who had called the very crusade, winds up excommunicating the Crusaders for just doing these atrocious things, which leads into a downward spiral. Over the next 100 years, Jerusalem changes hand a couple more times, but the Crusaders are never really able to hold the city. They can capture the city, but they can't hold it any longer because there's so much bickering between these crusading factions. The true Crusades, the things that we properly call a crusade, were always called with the purpose of recapturing the Holy Land. Fourth Crusade is an example where it was called for that purpose, but it didn't wind up having that as its main objective in the end. We still consider it one of the true Crusades, though. By 1272, however, there are no more serious efforts for Europeans to retake or take Jerusalem. The Crusades, as wars to capture the Holy Lands, cease in 1272. There were other fights, which are sometimes called crusades, depends on the historian who's talking about it. These were wars fought during the period of the Crusades, and they were fought to expand Christianity. Sometimes they were fought against Islam, such as some pseudo-crusades that were done in Egypt. Sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were fought against other religious groups. Sometimes they were fought against other Christian groups, such as this image right here, where we're actually seeing a crusade against a splinter group of Christianity within France, a group of Christians who had started to practice Christianity in a slightly different way. The church didn't like it. They waged war against other Christians, calling it a crusade against heresy. So This term crusade gets mixed around a lot. I will tend to focus on crusades as simply being those wars that were sent to recapture the Holy Land. This one, however, is worth mentioning and worth spending a little bit more time with. The Reconquista is not a crusade, but is a very important part of history. It was fought between 718 and 1492. Yes, you heard that right. 750 years in length. This was the efforts by European Christians to reconquer Spain. It ebbs and flows, goes back and forth a little bit. Here, I mean, we're within the realm of talking about Charles the Hammer, Charlemagne's grandfather, going all the way up to 1492 when Muslims are finally forced out of Spain. This is going on as Islam is really busy fighting other Western powers in the Holy Land. Spain is able to slowly but surely launch its Reconquista of the Iberian Peninsula, what we think of today as Spain and Portugal. And slowly they do drive Muslims and Jews out of the peninsula. Yes, Jews were a target in the Crusades. And yes, we're going to talk about that an awful lot more in our next lesson, where we look at anti-Semitism in the Crusades. But that is all that I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. I really hope you learned something, and I'll see you in class.